Welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to introduce EDGECAM 2020.1 version to our North American customers. My name is Joe Sanders, and I'm one of the application engineers at Hexagon. Today's presentation is a live webinar. We'll be taking questions at the end of that. If you have a look at your control panel, you'll notice that there's a questions area in there. So as I'm going through the material, if you have a question, please submit it directly through the questions area. I'll be looking at those questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll be answering them at that time. If you do have a question but are unable to stay until the end of the presentation, one suggestion is put the question in the panel anyway, and just note that you had to leave early. We can follow up with you at the conclusion of the presentation to answer your question. As always, you can reach out to your account manager if you have additional things you'd like to discuss, or our support desk if you have a technical support question. We're going to mute the phones and look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. In order to launch and use EDGECAM 2020.1, your software license needs to have an October 19 or a future date as the maintenance expiry. We're going to be explaining and demonstrating how to update the license, very quick and easy to do, and ensure that you're using the latest activation code and can use the newest software version. Staying up to date with the software, a couple of suggestions on how to do that. The Customer Community Forums is a great resource to use. So if you start at the Hexagon Customer Portal, as shown in the screen image here, and you choose the highlighted option for Customer Community Forums, it brings you to this site. There's a forum list, and in the forum list is an EDGECAM forum. And on that forum, pinned at the top, you always know the latest major software release and the latest service update for that release. So that's a great resource there. You can subscribe to it to get notifications about things, as well as use the knowledge base. Think of that as Google for EDGECAM, with answers to many frequently asked questions, and also interact with other users on the forum. The details on this version, you should refer to the What's New documentation. We're going to be showing you how to get to that from the EDGECAM launcher. You can also download that document from the software area where you download the software from, also highlighted on the screen image. The reason that we say that to refer to What's New is that that's where the complete information for this version is. This webinar is simply a selective technology highlight. We've chosen some of the technology that we feel is important to make sure that customers in the region understand how it works, what you're intended to do with it, and demonstrate some of that. But we certainly haven't covered every single item in this release. So refer to the What's New for that information. Today's agenda is going to be a little bit different than what we've done in some previous webinars. So we're going to begin with going through how to get to the software, some suggestions for installing it, and first launch. This is intended for customers that already have an existing version of software there and you got a new release out and you're a little nervous about what needs to happen. So we'll cover that with you. Then after we've gone through and done that, we will go and have a look at some of the highlights across the product range. Again, the more popular things that we think a lot of our customers will probably want to know about. And we'll also demonstrate the Tombstone Manager and how that can assist with multi-part assemblies. So let's start with going over an overview of our install process. Before you get rolling with an install, you should really make sure that you know whether you're a standalone or network type deployment. And so to help understand that, if you think about your local workstation, does that have, in addition to EDGECAM, both the license and the tool store database? Are those all on that computer? When we do a typical EDGECAM install, the local workstation is equipped to have the entire ecosystem, everything it needs to run. It is possible to take some of the pieces of that ecosystem and move them out to another computer on the network, which we'll call the server. So we could take the license, and with the network license option, we could put that license on the network. It's also possible to have the tool store database shared from a network resource so that Perhaps multiple users all share the same tool store database. So if you've gone and done that, you're going to have some items that are over on your network server, and then the local workstations have the EDGECAM license. So make sure to figure out if your license is on the local workstation, if the database is on the local workstation. If it is, then you're what we're going to call a standalone deployment. If your company's taken the license, the database, and those are hosted, either one, could be the other, could be both. If the license and or the database is hosted from a network server, then you're going to be what we're going to call a network deployment. And there's some slightly different steps that we're going to need to do for a typical install. Again, this is some general guidelines that apply to a wide range of folks. There are some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, that's what we're going to sort you out into, and we'll give you specific steps for each type. If you're a standalone user and everything that on that workstation is there, the whole local ecosystem, EDGECAM, the license, and the tool store database, then the checklist that you're going to want to use for install is shown over on the right. Feel free to take a digital picture of this with your camera on your phone, or maybe take a screen image and refer back to this. You're going to want to start with going to the Hexagon customer portal and downloading the EDGECAM 2020.1 DVD image. Once that's downloaded, the contents are extracted, you'll be able to go ahead on that local workstation and install EDGECAM. A typical install is usually appropriate for everything you need to do. Again, there are some unique cases, but generally speaking, do a typical install. Once that install is complete, everything the ecosystem needs is there. So you'll want to start with going to the launcher, and in the applications area, there's the license manager, and you can use that to update your license. Once you've done that, again from the launcher, we go to the tool store block, open the tool store administrator, and take care of database management. That would be tasks like making sure that the database is upgraded if it needs to be updated, selecting which database is the active database, mapping out the support files folder, potentially backing up databases and other common functions. Once that's done, you're ready to launch EDGECAM. The first time that you launch it, you're going to get the file migration utility. We're going to be showing some of these common steps as we go, but the file migration utility is really useful for situations where you already have an older version of EDGECAM on your workstation, and it's likely configured the way that you want. The file migration utility offers you the possibility to copy appropriate files, which may be post-processors, default files, screen layouts called themes, also to copy settings, and as much as possible, set up the new version to look just like the version that you've already got that you're comfortable with on your workstation. That goes a long way at helping us get a productive right away with a new version of software. And as many of our longtime users know, each version of EDGECAM is its own silo or container on the workstation. So it's possible to have multiple software versions that all coexist together, no problem. The file migration utility copies the settings from your previous configured version to your new one. Now, if you're in a network type deployment, you have a slightly different way that you want to attack the install process. And it always begins at the server. You start with squaring away the server. So if you've got your license on the server, we're going to take care of that there. If you've got your database on the server, we'll take care of that, and then we'll roll out to the local EDGECAM workstations. So your checklist is going to be to start with downloading the EDGECAM 2020.1 DVD image, but then also download the EDGECAM 2020.1 tool store server. It's listed up in the same area. And then we start with the server installs. If your company has a network license, then you're going to install the Sentinel RMS license server. This option is part of the DVD image, and it's on the splash screen, which we'll show you in a moment. After that's been done, you want to update the license. If your company hosts the tool store database from a network location, then you will want to install the SQL tool store. That option is the tool store server download I mentioned a moment ago. With that done, once that's installed, you may want to do some database management using the tool store administrator. That will be software that's on the server at that point. Start all programs and you can go run that. Once the server is set up with a license, if we're hosting a license from there, and with the database if we're hosting a database from there, now we're ready to roll out to the EDGECAM workstations. On each workstation, we're going to install EDGECAM, a typical install, and then before firing up the software, take a moment to configure the license using the License Manager app. If you have a network license, make sure you're pointed out to the correct license, and the correct tool store database using the tool store administrator. Once you've mapped both of those, you're now ready to launch EDGECAM and use the file migration utility. Okay, so I wanted to give everyone an overview of how that works. So if I go minimize my desktop and open up the DVD image, I've got a DVD image here, and let's talk about how we get that. We're always starting over at the customer portal, and in the download section, you can get out to software. So when we go in to the software area, we're able to see the latest version. And so that includes the what's new documentation that you can download, the DVD image, and if you're also using the tool store server, there it goes. And if you have Designer on your license, then Designer. So these are the three main things you'd possibly download at this point in time today. As service updates come available, we will see those service updates listed as well. So once you download and extract the DVD image, you'll have a folder set up like this here, and we always begin with Start Here. So when you double click on this, this is the launch screen that manages the install. We talked about folks with server type arrangements, how you've deployed the software. So if you have server installations, you're going to take care of those on the computer selected as the server. And then we're going to move to install EDGECAM. If everything's local on your machine as an EDGECAM user, then you can just jump right to installing EDGECAM. And that will take care of both the live job reports and CAD links as well. So as you start EDGECAM, it's usually a typical next style process. Now let's take a look at what happens after the install is done. So again, I'm going to come back here and go now to the launcher, because after installing EDGECAM, you'll have a launcher like we have here. So the first thing you'll want to do is go down to your license manager. And again, if you're on a network, you'll do this from a network. You'll have that option there. Standalone workstations, you'll do that. You'll take your current license and you'll install the license. Very easy to do. You can request a file. If with network connection, you can have it done automatically. The software will update your license right on the fly. I am doing that live. License is done. It's up to date, ready to use the latest version of software. Then we're going to roll out to the tool store administrator from the tool store area. And in there, this will list the different databases available, and we'll take the workstation, point it to the local current database. Now on my end, I want to point out something here. I am actually using the same database that we were using with 2020.0. This software version has not undergone a database update. So I'm actually sharing the same database between my 2020.0 and my 2020.1. If you want to, you can make a copy of that database. You don't have to share the database the way I've done here, but it's up to you. So after you've selected the database to make active, browse to set the support files folder if that has changed. And if you're in a network environment, then you're going to browse for the database. Remember, as we tell many of you in training classes, the tool store databases manages your current database. The active tool store database is where we take the local workstation and perhaps point it to a network database. Make sure the support files folder is where you want it. With both of those done, you're now ready to launch the software for the first time. Now, when you do that, you're going to get a file migration utility, which we can actually get to external to the software from the settings area, like I've done here. because obviously I've already run EDGECAM 2020.1 before. So when we go to migrate files, the file migration wizard is intended to take the files from your previous software version and copy the ones that you dictate over to the new software version, and you can control all that. By default, most of the options here are good to go. If you're not sure what you need to do, then perhaps just leave this the way it is and go ahead and run it. If you've already taken care of the tool store yourself, though, you probably just want to uncheck the tool store area, and then once that's done, go ahead and click install, and that will again copy appropriate files and other user settings. I'm going to cancel out of this, jump back here, and I want to point out a couple of things here. So when we go up to where are my user files, basically, if we look at documents, we can see that under the Bureau software folder, we have subfolders set up for many recent versions of EDGECAM, but there's not a 2020.1. So we're seeing all the versions of EDGECAM that I currently have installed on my workstation. I want to point out that with EDGECAM installs, each install is its own silo or container. They can all coexist together and be quite happy, as my systems are here. One change you have is where things go at 2020.1. If we go up to documents, we'll find a hexagon folder. And the hexagon folder, then under EDGECAM, is where we now have our 2020.1 data. Underneath here, it's the same folder structure that those of you familiar with our older versions and how those have been under Vera software are. But we just want to point that out. It's a slightly different place, but the point is it's under your documents area. So if you do a normal backup of your workstation, you'll easily have that. You get a new workstation, you copy your data, you've got the data as normal per common Microsoft rules. If you have custom macros or other automation that you've written and it doesn't work in the new version, chances are that you probably just need to update any hard-coded paths to pick up hexagon. The better way to do that is usually to use a variable that points to the local user path, but just keep that in mind, that one little change of this version of software. Okay, so headed back to the overhead here in the main slide. So when we take a look at this data here, again, this is coming from the installation guide. We'll point out where that is. Just a quick note on some of the major CAD systems and current versions that EDGECAM is running. So let's switch over and show you where we get that data from. So back on the EDGECAM launcher, under the question mark icon, you have a few different pieces of information. The installation guide is one I got this from. There's also a licensing guide, as well as access to the entire user guide. Let's start with the installation guide and go into installing the software and supported CAD systems and interfaces. And this is where you can find the complete list of all of the different CAD platforms that EDGECAM supports, and specific notes in this case for users that have Autodesk Inventor on their files that they need to open, and some instructions on that. If I come back to here and look at what's new, another area that you want to check out after installing a new version. It's a handy reference. It's a PDF document that lists all of the things new in the software. So if I see something that intrigues me, I can click on that item and jump directly to it in the documentation. Okay. So now as we head to the next thing in our agenda, we're now going to have a look at software evolution and changes not only in milling, but also in turning as well. So again, some highlights of some things in the system. So I want to start with the face mill cycle. The face mill cycle now has horizontal lead types. In previous versions, we did not have the option to select between horizontal and vertical, and leads were always from a vertical direction. So now you can select which direction they come from and have that lead control. The stock options have also been expanded so that we can have face milling done from either a 3D model or the current stock. The profile option is the way that the software capability in this cycle worked in previous versions. So some nice expansions there. We'll be showing how this works in a demonstration in a bit. The chamfering cycle has also undergone some revision. So the dialog box is reordered, and to show what that looks like, here is the dialog box at EDGECAM 2020.0 version. And here is that same dialog box at EDGECAM 2020.1. And probably the first thing you'll note is that there's now a control tab. That's really the big visible thing. So we're seeing further technology that we're familiar with in profiling and whole cycle and other things moved out into the chamfering cycle per user request. Also a few new things. So the box has been reordered a bit to accommodate, simplify the layout, make it standard with the other cycles. So in terms of new capability, there's a Z offset ability now that we didn't have before. You can see that input field under the graphic. There's cut increments, so we can take deep chamfers and take them in smaller passes within the same cycle now. Real popular enhancement. And optimizing the path and corner strategies. These really expand the usability of the chamfering cycle. There are common requests, and we're excited to show these to you in a few minutes as well. All right. Parallel lace. This is another high frequency of request. We all want to have the tool run along the direction of our cut, start off the part and finish off the part. And there's new extension input fields that let us do that. Some other noteworthy things. Fixture tolerance. So when you're creating a sequence, the third page of the create milling sequence dialog, in the update stock area, there's a new option for fixture tolerance. So we've had stock tolerance and the maximum stock size that we can set for some time now. Now we can set tolerance on the fixtures. And this will speed up simulator for those of you with complex fixture items, speed up the launch time into simulator and some other processing. The slot cycle has a new option to relax the gouge check. And we'll demonstrate how this works. And basically what it does is, if you have, in previous versions, if you had a slot that you're machining that's from a solid, let's say that the slot is a 3/4 inch wide slot, but the designer designed the slot and it's not exactly 375 thousandths of an inch, but your tool is. If your slot is narrower than the actual decimal tool width, the software wouldn't let the tool gouge the solid, and so the tool wouldn't go through there at all. The cycle would just say, I quit, give up, and go away. Well, today, we can turn on the relax gouge check, and the software essentially removes the gouge check, allows the tool path to be built, and will give us suitable notification in the feedback window. So we can still continue to get the tool path done as in the new version. That's the point. We'll demonstrate a practical explanation of that, but that's a real nice option to have there for those of you that use the slot cycle. For those of you that have nutated CNC machines where the rotary axes are not orthogonally aligned, you can now get into rotary mode. That will help some of you that have been wanting to do radial whole cycles and other things like that. Any of you that have begun exploring additive capability with hybrid machines that can do both additive and CNC machining, boundary controls now been added to the additive cycles, as well as maximum overhang angle. It's very useful for those of you that are beginning to use those types of machines and see those applications. And Tombstone Manager has some improved ordering, and second sequences are now supported. We'll be showing how this works. Don't tune out on Tombstone Manager. Those of you who say, oh, I don't have a tombstone on my milling machine, this isn't for me. It actually might be. So have a look at what we're going to show about how that works, in case you've never explored this module and what it might do for you. On the turning side, one of the things that may be helpful for users, especially users with difficult materials where we have to change out inserts. The swarf clearance now has ability to specify time as the way that we control how much the tool cuts before retracting. So if I have an insert and we know that that insert has a cut life in a difficult, perhaps material such as maybe a super alloy, we know that insert will last about 12 minutes. We can go ahead and put a time in there, and at 12 minutes worth of cut, the tool will come out for an insert change. So a nice option to have there. The finished groove cycle now has current stock ability added to it, and its intent is for pre-finish plunge use. So you can see what that is in the dialog. That allows us to take a situation where perhaps our groove width tool is slightly smaller than the groove, but we don't really have a heavy roughing application, but we still want to avoid potential collisions. We'll demonstrate a usage of that, and that'll be a nice option for those of you in that situation. Then also the lathe turrets, we now have half index capability. We'll show what that means, but for example, you may have a machine that's a 12 station turret, 12 physical flats, but you can actually use special tooling and get 24 indexes. The machine can do half index capability. Many of the turret lathe type manufacturers offer this as a machine option, and EDGECAM can now support it right out of the gate. Just as a side note, we have been supporting that for some time, but we'll show you how that works. There's a new option in Code Wizard on the machine tab, on the machine page or section on the turret tab that we use to configure that. Okay, with that said, let's go have a look at this capability. So I'm going to go back here to the EDGECAM launcher, and I'm actually going to begin not in EDGECAM, but over in Designer. I'm going to bring in a solid model that is, we could go machine it using the technology we have today, but Designer will clean this up for us real quick. So let's go out and grab this file that I was given, put it on the hat of the machinist. We're given this file, and it is a forming die, and pretty sure how I want to machine it. I'm pretty sure that I want to use a parallel lathe cycle to machine this, the top surfaces here. But as we look at the surfaces, we can see that they're interrupted both by these pockets that cut in from the side and also these holes. Now think about how we're going to build toolpath and EDGECAM to run across those as if they don't exist. There are some ways to do that, but Designer will present us with some very easy ways to accomplish this as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell this that what we want to do is we want to come in here and remove just some of these areas here. Remove them right out of the solid as if they didn't exist. It doesn't matter that I don't have the same CAD system that this was designed in. That's the point of Designer, is to be a quick tool to help do the work to prepare models for more easier machining in our CAM software. So as the software goes and takes and does that complex task, notice the results. That surface is exactly as if those never existed. So my tool is going to make a really neat cut across there. It's not just a sheet of paper stretched across there, such as a feature cap or a simple surface might be. Let's continue on and use that in the hole areas as well. So I'm going to go in here and let's add in, let's go remove some faces again. Again, there's a variety of things you can do. You can even meld your own solid from the ground up. But in this case here, we're going to go ahead and wait for it to come back here. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Meant to turn on multi-select so I could select a variety of different things. So let's go add some more holes. We'll add these holes here, those, that one, that one, these as well. So add on those holes, and then we'll say remove and again heal the component. And this is going to give us a nice clean solid for this stage of the manufacturing process, where I'm just interested in taking this block of material and getting the top face of that cut in. We're going to deal with the other things at a later machining setup. And Designer helps very quickly prep this model for manufacturing. It was much easier to do it at EDGECAM, and that's the point. So I'm going to go ahead and save this part, and then I'm going to pass it to my CAM software. And so now this is when we'll see EDGECAM 2020.1 open and launch for the first time. Now, even though that we saw that the magic files, we'll call them the user files, are inside documents in hexagon, the software is going to have no problem opening. It looks and feels much the same as previous versions. Now, I have turned off my auto alignment intentionally for this particular part because I want to show how we can quickly get the part into the position that we want to. Now, we can use these controls, as many of you have seen. We can also align component, and I can pick this face to represent the bottom of the face of the part. Now, notice that what that does is it flips the part over here, right? We'll say that we want this edge to be the long edge on the part, and I can say that I want to move the origin, say, over to here. So in one command, this align component, we've quickly positioned the part several different ways. Let's flip the part around the axis this way and very quickly position the part without worrying about really what angle it is. Let's now go add stock to this. So again, I'll pick this model here, and we'll tell it that the size that we're going to want here, keep the box the same, but we'll say we want a 4.5 inch height and nothing on the bottom. So there's about 100 thousandths at the high end here. And now we'll go ahead and set the datum based on the stock, not on the component. Then go continue with adding fixture into this. We'll put this in a Curt D100 vise, and that looks pretty good. Now you may notice that there's a couple solids here. Again, that's a benefit to me because I've got the part we're machining here, and then the other solid body being the true finished part that we have to get to. So they're on separate layers. I can easily turn them on and off. Virtual CAM setup is largely in place. The last thing I need to do is create the milling sequence. We'll choose our post processor. I'll skip a job kit entirely on this particular one. We'll just pick tools on the fly. Now I want to point out in the update stock, the third page of the create milling sequence, update stock, this new ability to set a fixture tolerance. We've always had ability to set stock sizes, stock tolerance, but we can also now set fixture tolerance. So when I press OK, the sequence is created. The software previews it inside my CNC machine. I'm good with all that. Let's continue with selecting the material. We'll say this is tool steel so that we can choose tools based on that. Now you may notice I've completely skipped the feature page. I haven't extracted any surfaces off the part. I've not done any prepping the model other than what we did in Designer. And I'm immediately going to go in and choose a big old ball mill that's capable of doing the machining here. So look through my tool list and I say, I really like this 1.5-inch Coro mill, ball mill. Let's go ahead and pull this tool down, put it into tool station number 1. We'll give it a suitable color for machining. We'll use dark blue in this case. Check our spindle and coolant, and off we go. Now we're going to go in and look at the parallel lay cycle. So parallel lay cycle is on your standard mill or production and higher licenses. Some of you may have used it for 3D contour mill before. We'll do general cutting. And just for demo purposes, I'll have a fairly large step over. We'll cut along the x-axis direction or grain and finish putting in my cycle parameters. Now what I want to note here is that over on the Control tab, when I go to Extensions, we have ability to now extend the tool path. Now I'm going to extend it a long amount, an inch, at both the start and the end. Let's make sure that we're requesting optimize so we can switch back and forth. We'll do a smooth transition between the cuts and then lead. Now, some of you may be saying, well, extensions, does that really do anything for us? We could go and do that with leads before. You're right, we could put in a tangent lead on the surface in most cases and then ask for maybe a 1-inch long lead, and that would have done the same thing to do with extensions, but it would mean that we couldn't also use leads, and here I can do both. I can say I want vertical leads that come in from a 90-degree sweep, maybe a 0.2 radius, and a no additional, or maybe another 100,000 cell length on top of that. Select the stuff to machine, that entire solid model, go do it. Now right now we see the tool path drip off the edge because I allowed it to, but if I go in and say ignore the outside edges, which again is fairly common with parallel lace, we can see now the lead moves. Now those right now are horizontal, so let's just continue to tweak them. We'll make those be a vertical lead, and we'll tighten up our percent step over now that we can see what's happening, down to about 10%, and notice that my short link distance will increase that to about a 1/2 inch. And so now the software does exactly what I asked to. It leads in with a vertical lead on the first cut, it leads out with a vertical lead on the last cut. All the moves extend 1 inch. I didn't have to do any additional geometry construction. So that's based on extensions and our start and end distances. So real useful enhancement for those of you in the 3D mold and die world. I want to now go and look at some of the stuff with face milling. So if we switch over to our face milling now. When we look at this part here and we double click on the cycle to open it, I want to point out, by the way, notice that I'm on the setup tab. Doing this intentionally, I'm editing the tool path directly from here to demonstrate that EDGECAM is modeless. You can run any command from any tab you want, quite frankly. If you want to look for a new command, there's a quick search bar, just as a side note, where we could run Feature Finder from the manufacturing tab, for example, just by typing that in. We've been sharing that with users and finding that that's a real helpful tip for them. Okay, so down in here, moving over to the lead page, notice that we now have ability to ask for horizontal lead type. So I'll ask for a horizontal lead. We'll say we want equal lead moves, and I'll say that I want a 90-degree swing. This is a metric part, so let's say we want a 50mm radius in here. So after asking OK, we can see that the tool path leads in with a 40mm length, swings in with the 50mm radius, but only on the first and last passes. This is very helpful at rolling in and rolling out of the material. It's something our tool vendors and our customers have been asking for. Very easy to pull off and do. The lead options there. So this type is what's new there. Let's go look at the stock selection. So for this one, I'm going to choose a different model to help illustrate how the stock capability works now. So you notice in this part that we have a part where the rendered stock, the yellowish stuff, actually has 4 different heights to it. And we've taken care of that with a single face mill cycle. This time I'll take the more traditional route and go to the machining tab and edit the cycle. And here the stock type is set to current stock. And you may notice that the yellow picking tiles are actually grayed out completely. The previous versions, you didn't have stock type, but it was essentially profile, and you selected the stock to machine as a 2D profile. Well, now when we choose current stock, the pick goes away because the software is responsible to find the flats in the part, machine them based on the difference between the part and the stock, or the part where the flats are and the stock. So how does that work? Well, first we choose current stock, standard technology that we've been using for quite some time in other cycles. And over on the depth page, the level is now associative to the highest point of the stock, and we're putting in our material removal amount in depth. So to put another way, we're saying, hey, you know where the stock is. Start at the highest point of the stock and remove 35 millimeters of tool path, or sorry, 35 millimeters of material. And so EDGECAM does exactly what we asked for. Notice that it's intelligent about those different pieces of stock and only spends time machining where there's material and properly applies the cut increment based on the height of stock to the finished part in each area. Well, let's try taking advantage of EDGECAM's associativity. This stock is a solid model, and we'll reload and replace that with a different file. So when we go in here to the stock type 2 and reload that, and then regenerate the sequence, notice that this stock has a much higher point on one of the cylinders. And at first glance, it looks like there's a problem, but there's not. Again, keep in mind the intent. Machine from the current stock and then remove this amount of material. Well, since the stock's much taller, we need to remove a different amount, and I'm going to pick that directly from the model. I'm going to turn off the stock rendering for a moment, because when the stock is not rendered, it makes it a little bit easier to pick through to the things underneath. And then I'll turn the stock rendering on for visibility. So again, I've quickly updated our intent. Let's look at a similar idea, but with a different shape stock. So when I reload this again, and we go out to the third variant, this piece of stock is squared off now on the outside. And again, the software picks that up. So what we had before for tool path and what we have now for tool path. So give a play on your end when you get to the new software. If you're someone that does face milling and you have stock with different size heights, give it a play and let us know what you think. Let's go now and have a look at another part. Now, I want to point out that this part that we're going to look at next for chamfer and slot work is a file that was built in EDGECAM 2020.0. How do we know that? Well, if you take any EDGECAM file and you right-click over the file and you go to Properties, on the Custom tab, you can see the version it was created in as well as the version it was last saved in. So if you're ever wondering what version a file was in, that's a quick, convenient way to tell. In this part, this is a fixture plate, and it only has chamfering toolpath in it right now for 3 different applications. There's some chamfering along the top of some holes, and you can see when you look at the path that the path is in a very, very random order. It's great that it built all the tool path, but the order is something that leaves something to be desired. We have a second step down where, again, a bit of a random order. And then we have a third area here where there's actually a fairly heavy chamfer. So there's a chamfer modeled in here. And this is all built using the technology that was available to us at EDGECAM 2020.0 and some of the recent versions before that. I'm first going to begin with going into the chamfering cycle up here, and we'll take a look at the layout of the new box. You'll notice that, again, we have the Control tab, and so there's been a little bit of movement of some things. On the Depth tab, we have the new cut increment field that's been here before, and this is also where we now get the chamfer depth, contact point, and tip offset options. Those had been on the General tab in previous versions. Over on the Control tab, we see the new optimized path capability. While this is new to chamfering, it's been around in the whole cycle and profiling, and I believe thread mill perhaps, and some others. It's been here in the software for quite some time. It's moved into here. Let's use an X lace so that we're telling the software it can move back and forth across the part along the X-axis in a lace pattern. Just try that one option and then press OK. We can see now that path is improved somewhat. We can see the path moves back and forth, but I can also see that there's some areas where, like for example, a couple of holes here where some of these holes are fairly closely aligned, and because of this, the X lace parameter, we're actually running further down the X than I'd like to. I could easily make that more efficient by putting in a lace bandwidth. So if I say 1 inch, we're allowing that row along X to vary by up to an inch, so that the software can fit in tool path and other close by holes along the way. So notice now that we have a little bit better path across there. Again, before with no lace bandwidth, before with 2020.0 version, quite a random order there. So that's certainly a better order. Let's do the same thing here, but we'll change the path slightly. We'll say this one here would be better suited by closest next, common for holes, for example. And so that path is now sorted out and becomes a little bit more efficient. Let's go look at this chamfer cut. And we're going to see that we do have Z offset capability if you want to leave material. Nice thing to have. But here I'm going to look at cut increment. And so what our intent here, this is a heavy cut for the tool. And I don't want to take all that in one shot. I want to break that up a bit. So if we go in here and we ask for the cut increment to be, for example, 10,000ths of an inch, we can see that we now have multiple passes where the software is taking those multiple passes as we go. Now we also see how we have a big lead move and then step down. Why is that? Well, it's the same thing you would find in profiling or anything else. For one thing, leads are applied to the long link only, and that's an indication that those moves are short link moves because of their values here. So if I change this up a bit, I now have tool path that leads in and leads out and then repositions on every single cut. If I want to keep the tool down between passes, then I'll still leave the leads the way they are and just set the short link distance to something reasonable for this cut. And now we have the tool stay down at feed as it works along there. Again, exactly like profiling because it's the same technology, just made available to the general tab. Speaking of profiling and looking closely at these holes, we can see if let's orbit around this point. So I'm going to move the mouse over this hole, I'm going to hold the control key and right click. We see things jump a bit and now the orbit point is smoothly along that area. When I go and zoom in on this and look at the lead is okay, but I actually want the tool to push in at the center. So again, same things that we have in profiling. Other areas start at the center of the area. So now the software comes in at the center of those holes, does the cut and moves out. So some neat things with chamfering that should make our lives easy. Let's go and look at slots. There's a couple of slots over here. So now we'll control right click over here. So now I can orbit at that slot position here. Now if I start by taking that slot feature, this pocket here, and I look at the properties of that through my properties window. Notice down when you get to the slot area that the software reports the slot with this 0.373 and 9/10. Well, that's going to be a little bit of a problem because when we go out to the tool database, I want to use a 3/8 tool. So let's go find a 3/8 end mill. We'll pull that tool down. We see the automatic tool change that we've asked EDGECAM to do in our preferences. It's gone and done that. We'll give this a suitable color, check spindle and coolant, that all looks good. And now we'll go out to our slot cycle. Now to assist me with laying this dialog the way I like to see things laid versus the way EDGECAM likes it, I've created a mask. So when I go to my mask for slots, again, just using EDGECAM the way it's intended to be used. Notice the strategy changed to solid, but a lot of other settings that I think are useful for how I commonly use slot have all been set. So now I can just go through the box and make some quick changes. So here, one of the changes is that I want the tooltip to be somewhat below the feature, let's say 20,000ths of an inch. I want the tool to feed when retracting, absolutely. Over on the lead page, I'm going to ask for a ramp type lead. We'll put a ramp angle of 10 degrees, and this is a center cut capable tool. So we'll tell the software a little bit about that. Now notice that right now I have not checked relax gouge check. I'm going to turn that on and I'll show you why. When I relax the gouge check and press OK, and then pick this feature, the software will allow me to put a tool that's 0.375 diameter into a slot that is narrower than that 0.375 decimal amount. On the feedback window, We have some notes about that. Now let me go in here and take the slot and turn that off. If I take away the relax gouge check, the software says I can't do it because that tool is the wrong size or shape to cut the slot without gouging. So in previous versions, there are some other ways we would have to combat this, but it wasn't as simple as saying, take this tool and put it into the slot. It's close enough, basically. And that's what the new option in the slot cycle to relax gouge check lets us do. So if you're a user who has a lot of these slots, and traditionally you've had some difficulty getting your tool into them and had to take other methods to get them done, check this out. Perhaps turn that on as a default in your dialog box and in your own masks. And that should make it much easier to deploy slot toolpath for some of these part shapes. Okay, let's go over now and look at a couple of turn highlights for our lathe users. So I'm going to begin with opening up a part here that is an aerospace housing done in a VTL. And it's done out of Inconel, and we've got a lot of roughing toolpath here. Software estimate right now is this is 10 hours worth of toolpath based at the feeds and speeds and cut increments we've asked for. So if we go into the software and go into the swarf clearance, we've had a lot of this ability for some time, but what we now have is ability to set a time in minutes. So here I'm going to say that this tool should be able to machine for about 30 minutes before we change out. When it changes out, we track out to X26 and Z1 and stop the program. So the operator can change the insert. So with that said, we can see graphically the retractions put in. After 30 minutes of cutting, the tool's retracted out to my X26 Z1 safe retraction. The operator changes out the insert. When they hit cycle start, the software leads the tool back in and continues cutting. I've easily done that in a single CAM file. Very quick, very easy. Now there's some additional work that we've done on this part to take a backwork style tool, and actually took a groove tool and used waveform rough turn to clear all this material out and then finish this out. And the next tool I've got is a groove tool here. So in this particular groove area, we have a tool that's going to need to drop into here. And if I kind of hide that out of the way and you see the shape here, this is the shape we're after. This is slightly wider than the groove tool. And so what we have now for path is the tool plunges in, and that feed across is probably going to break that tool. But the tool's not so wide, or the groove's not so wide or so deep that we would feel that we really had to use roughing, where in some cases we certainly would want to. Well, now in today's latest version of software, we can say that we want the pre-finished plunge at center, which we've had for some time, but we now want to have the software aware of the current stock. And so now I can come in here and say that let's keep the plunge off that bottom wall by about 5 thousandths. Let's have the clearance be 100 away, and perhaps on this cut here, we'll feed in, because it is full width, a slightly slower feed rate. So with just those handful of options put in, the software takes the shade in the stock, it recognizes where the current stock is, and it does exactly what we want, so that we now come in and feed the tool into here to clear the bulk of material out, and then we can safely make these other cuts in the groove and get it done in a single finish groove cycle instead of having to rough it first and then finish it later to avoid tool breakage. Very nice. Okay, so the last thing we're going to look at here is half index capability. For those of you who have us manage your post processors and keep them up to date, if you have half index capability, just let us know. We can take care of it. For those of you that manage your own post processors, this is what you want to do. First of all, you need to update your CodeWizard template to gain the ability to use the new capability. So here I have my Haas ST20Y. We've updated the template. That keeps the changes I have. It adds in the new CodeWizard capability. And when we go out to the machine section, over on the turret page, we see this new option to support for half turret positions. I'm going to check that and press OK. And then the final step is that over in the machine setup window, we go down and identify where the turret is. And notice that you now have this new turret half positions table where you can put in EDGECAM's code wizard positions and the real machine's turret positions. So in this case, this is not a 12 station turret, it's actually a 24 station. So when I go into EDGECAM and go in here and say, you know what, this is really a 24 station turret. Now when I go down to my turret area here, most of the time these arrangements are that station 1 to 3 is the full index, station 1 to 2 is the half index, and out of the CNC machine, that half index would on station 1 would actually be numbered T13 or turret 13. So we can set this table up or this map up so that the software is able to get the code right and also the simulation right for any machine we see on the market. So very easy to configure. Definitely something you want to do if you have this type of machine. All right, I realized that with my mistake of not sharing screen, we're headed slightly over. So for those of you who do have to leave, certainly drop us a note after if you have any questions. For those of you who can stay, I would like to show you some quick things on Tombstone Manager and the capability here. So in some ways, Tombstone Manager is a demonstration, but I think that you find it very interesting for those of you with multi-part setups. I'm going to start by changing my theme, which is my screen layout. The theme that I'm loading here is to help demonstrate that this is not the mode where we build toolpath in, it's the mode where we assemble toolpath. So the concept is that I'm getting ready for a production run. Second shift is going to come in and I want to have a part set up for them. And I've already got the files actually put together. Let's start by loading this file of my table. So for example, this represents the machine table out on my vertical milling center. If I take the view of the machine away, I have a big table and I've got a bunch of parts I got to cut tonight. So I want to make a big old production run for this. So I'm going to come in here and go into this engine mount where I program the first side and the second side together in the same CAM file as multiple relational setups. So when I bring this file in, I'm going to say I want to bring in and put setup 1 onto the vice 1 location, and we see that popped right in. Well, I want to make a bunch of these, so in one cycle start I can run 4 of them. How do I do that? Well, I just copy this 3 more times and say put this one over on vice 2, put this one over on vice 3, put this one over on vice 4. We have options for your fixture clearance, your ordering, and your output. Now there have been some improvements to ordering that are very visible here. But there's also a lot of things that while it looks on the surface like Tombstone Manager is the same Tombstone Manager we've had for some other recent versions, it actually gives us a lot of new capability and smooths out some things that, that we were finding in the field. So one of the things here is that this is going to create a single CAM file, or single CNC code file, I should say, out of a CAM file I already programmed. Datum 1, let's say that's G54. G55, G56, G57. This is essentially a throwaway CAM file. It was super easy to put together. I can go code this out and I now can give my machinist a code file that will produce 4 parts out of that machine and effectively use that machine table. Super easy to put together. I really just had to build good quality tool path for 1 part. Okay, that's useful for that. I can see that. Well, what about for more complex stuff? Well, let's go take a look at that. So I'm going to start a brand new file. And in that brand new file, I'm going to begin the process the same way of bringing in my seed file. Now, this is just basically it's a part where we've got some pre-positioned targets via work plane setup. So I've got a vice 1, vice 2, vice 3, vice 4 work plane set up in this file. And this is the one that I'll be bringing in these other parts into. So as I go to add parts here, I'm going to start with the engine mount. I'm going to bring in that setup 2 file again. But as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 setups in here. Setup 1, let's put using its coordinate system on device 1. Let's bring in a second part. I'm going to bring in the same file again, but this time I'm going to bring in the other side of it, which I programmed with multiple relational setups, that neat ability that EDGECAM has. Now, so that's setup 2. Let's go bring in a different file now. So our production control manager came and said, you know, I got a pair of files tonight. What can we do about them? And say, just give them to me, because I can do this pretty easily in EDGECAM. We'll put that part in device 3. We'll bring in that same file, and it also has a second side setup. Setup 2 goes into setup 2 and in device 4. Go apply that. And so what the software is doing is it's bringing in essentially 4 different parts, if you think of it that way. Now, the way I put the parts together is I have one CAM file where I've got setup 1, I've got a second relational setup so that the software automatically picks up the stock from the first setup, carries it through to the second setup, and they're all tucked into the same CAM file. It's pretty convenient for common prismatic parts like this. We are now doing those 4 different files together on the machine table in one shot. This will be one program where, again, we go from our first datum, we'll call it G54, to our next datum, to our next datum, to our next datum. If you think about what's happening here, this is assembly mode for your CAM software. It's allowing us to take parts that I've already programmed in EDGECAM and bring them together to create production runs. So we're taking advantage of what the software can already do. When we go to Simulator, Simulator will show us the file. Now, how else could we do this in EDGECAM? Well, I could bring in all these files and put them on my table and program. That's going to take a lot of time to do, quite frankly. We could also use the older insert component and merge sequence and rationalize workflow. And while that still works, it's more work to do than it is to simply do this. And the files that we create with Tombstone Manager, those parts can be edited. So I can actually go back and edit or even reload that part and have associativity back to those other files. I can't do that with the insert component, merge sequences, and rationalize workflow. So it still uses all the highlights of that workflow of what the end product is, but it does it much more easily and gives me some significant benefits. So when we watch this thing run, I'll run this at a fairly high speed, and I realize that that is going to have some impact on simulation. We can control what happens first. I didn't bother to do that for this quick demo, but notice that we see the same face mill used here, right? So we've used the face mill, then we're putting it away. Now we're bringing up another tool. If this tool is needed on all 4 parts, then the software will use this on all 4 parts, and again, datum change is necessary. The things that need to happen first in the process do happen first in the process. And like we talked about with the multiple relational setups, we can actually see the in-process stock from the first setup on this part shown accurately. So again, just great stuff here with Tombstone Manager, and really just expanding the use of this, not only to folks that have Tombstone applications, but also to folks who have multi-part machining applications. Okay, so for more information on this new version of EDGECAM, or perhaps any of the things that we've discussed and shown here, please talk to your account manager. Just as a side note, a lot of the reason for doing this demonstration of the new technology this way instead of the ways we've done it before have come from being out with customers, working with them in their applications, and recognizing that this is actually a lot of the thing that customers would rather have us show than go through every single thing in a new version. So if you are wanting the other one, please raise your hand and let us know so we can understand that. But if you would like us to come out to your facility and work with you on your applications and perhaps show you some things about the software that you didn't realize it could do, we can certainly do that as well. We're accessible to you, so talk to your account manager. You can download the software from the EDGECAM website, and don't forget about the customer community forums where you can subscribe for email updates so that you're notified of new service updates as they're released, and check out the What's New documentation for more information about this version, including things that we chose not to highlight in this brief overview. Okay. So with that said, we're going to turn it over to Q&A now. So if any of you have questions, would you please